Hello, everyone. We're going to talk about a film called The Rule of Jenny Penn. Give you an alert here. This is going to be a spoiler review. This film is a psychological horror film starring Geoffrey Rush and John Lithgow, adapted from an Owen Marshall story, a New Zealand author, by James Ashcroft and Eli Kent. They're also New Zealanders. This story is a classic example of a cat and mouse thriller. So, going into the plot, Jeffrey Kent. Jeffrey Rush plays Stefan Mortensen. He's this very crusty judge who has a stroke at the beginning of the film and finds himself in rehab at a nursing home. There, he is introduced to the place's residents and eventually comes under the shadow of Dave Crealy, who at first presents as, this fairly innocuous patient with dementia. But it turns out that he's actually a sadistic, evil genius who's been terrorizing the residents of the nursing home in various ways. And he singles out Stefan for special torment. Now, I love Jeffrey Rush, but John Lithgow for me is somebody, I mean, I'll watch him read the phone book, and he's just endlessly interesting and intriguing to me. Also, somebody who can play anything.
Yeah.
This film is familiar terrain for John Lithgow, though. He's got a long career of playing a lot of different kinds of parts. But one of the things we can always count on from him is that with fair frequency, he'll play a villain. He's really good at playing villains, has a long track record of doing great work as a
Yep.
villain.
Oh yeah.
And other than this film, older audiences might remember him in Brian De Palma's Raising Cain. And maybe younger audiences, slightly younger audiences, would remember him as the Trinity Killer in the fourth season of Dexter. Uh, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I was wondering about this film. So I didn't get a chance to see this in the theaters. It did
Mm.
not open in my area. It was a huge bummer. I want to ask you about Jenny Penn, the hand puppet baby doll figure that should be like right the focal point of the terror in the movie. Was that interesting? Was it?
Jenny Penn as a puppet, as a character in herself in the film is really interesting, and she is a focal point of the horror. The weirdest, most uncanny moments in the film feature that puppet. One of the things that's happening, and this is where we kind of get into some more spoiler territory, is uh, because Stefan has had a stroke and because he's an older man, uh, the stroke has facilitated a deterioration of his mental state. He's in the earlier stages of dementia. And so that's progressing as the film goes on. And so one of the things that happens throughout the film is that Stefan's character has these glitchy moments where he kind of like fades away, goes away, and at that point we're not sure what we're watching is real or not. Or if we are sure, we understand that he's in a dream state now. He's kind of hallucinating.
Yeah.
And Jenny Penn, the puppet, is tends to be at the center of those hallucinations in one way or another. And there are moments peppered throughout the film where the puppet, kind of takes on a life of its own. Those are the most horror-esque moments of the film, and they're really interesting and really well done, I think.
Is there a point where the psychological leans into the supernatural with Jenny Penn?
I think that the film is not a pure horror piece in that sense, because I think one of the things that's really interesting about the film is that Dave Crealy is the bad guy. He's the film's monster, but he's not, he's the primary monster, but he's not the only one. The other major monster is the horror of aging and the horror of the nursing home as this place that's set aside for aging and for death. In terms of the supernatural, I really find myself thinking very much about how places have this kind of spiritual quality to them. That's one of the things that this film has been compared by at least one film critic, one reviewer, to The Shining. And of course, if fans of The Shining know that the most terrifying thing about that film, other than Jack Nicholson, is the Overlook Hotel, right?
Sure.
So the idea that this hotel, this is the appeal of haunted house films. These spaces have a spiritual and metaphysical quality to them that's bad, right? It's toxic. And that comes through really clearly in this film. The nursing home is this place that is disturbing in ways that extend towards the supernatural.
I like that a lot, actually. Back to the Jenny Penn puppet, like, what is the origin of that puppet? Where does it come from?
It's apparently it's a doll that's given to residents, so that apparently it alleviates the symptoms of dementia. They can have something to interact with. I mean, they're actually called dementia dolls. There's a moment in the film where um, Stefan is at a table and this book is on on the counter next to him. I think it's in a library, and it's a book about the therapeutic effects of puppets. So it becomes this grimly ironic moment because, of course, Jenny Penn is the agent of torment, not an agent of therapy. Um, but that its purpose is medical and therapeutic. So it just adds another layer to the horror, right?
And some like dark
Um,
potential dark humor there.
yeah, very much so. So if you're getting at the idea that the film plays around with possibly occult origins for the doll or for the puppet, it really doesn't. Um, Jenny Penn herself has no backstory. She seems there only as, one of the props designed to be therapeutic for the residents. Why Dave Crealy has decided to make her the centerpiece of his torment, his sadistic game, that isn't explained at all.
I like what I'm hearing though about how the film is not purely a horror film.
This film harnesses one of I think the basic fears and anxieties we have about this is that it's scary enough to get old. It's scary enough to be close to your death. It's scary enough to be sick and to be um, dependent and not be able to walk the way you used to and think the way that you used to and do things like for yourself. That's all scary enough. But then you add these terribly these depressing places that all this terrible stuff has to take place in. Every time I'm in a hospital, every time I'm in a nursing home or any kind of thing, it's like I understand on a kind of organizational, logistic, bureaucratic level why these places have to be the way they are. And yet it's hard not to think that, that these places weren't designed with the devil at the organizer's elbow, right? Because there is just something uniquely dehumanizing and demoralizing about them. These spaces seem to, I almost seem like they seem to facilitate the very death and the decay that they're supposed to be alleviating, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like I was thinking about that through the entire movie. It's like, does it really have to be this way, right? I mean, do we have, you know, what we have to go through as mortal creatures is bad enough. Does it have to take place in a place like this?
Yeah.
Isn't there some kind of alternative? And the film just does wonderful drawn out things with the space and the phenomenon of these nursing homes and these care centers. The most terrifying thing about the whole film then is that this space is uniquely suited for Dave Crealy, who is the master of this space. Another spoiler alert, he's worked for many decades at the care center that he's now a patient at, as a nurse or in some other capacity, who knows. Um, so he knows the ins and outs of the place perfectly, and he knows how to get away with what he's doing.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's another way that the place becomes monstrous is that it's hospitable to him in a way that it is to none of the other residents. A monster like Dave Crealy is the only one who finds himself at home in this nursing care rehabilitation center.
Ooh, that's fascinating. And then the other question I had is like, what was your reaction to like the ending of the movie?
I really liked it in a lot of ways. I think it is again a film that's really much more about aging and reflecting on one's legacy and about what one's life meant and what one did that had value and I think the film ends on that note. If you're talking about the climax, what eventually happens to with Dave Crealy and Stefan and everyone else, I found it a bit anticlimactic. Um, and I don't think I'll say what happened, even though we've already given you spoiler alerts. I will say that I think the Dave Crealy character is dispatched a little too easily, in a way that feels anticlimactic to me.
Okay.
Now it's hard for me to think about how else it could have gone when I'm looking back on it, because I have to keep in mind that these characters are elderly, right? I mean, it's not as if Dave Crealy and Stefan can have a kung fu, fight at the end of the film. And thank goodness, that would be very silly. So yeah, the way that Dave Crealy is dispatched, I found myself thinking, oh, is this it? This is okay. On the
Oh.
one hand, good. Screw that guy. But on the other hand, you know.
Okay. All right.
Um, yeah.
Okay.
But I think that if you want a film that that the director and the other filmmakers clearly put a lot of thought into, that I think as a formal piece of filmmaking is really satisfying. The sound effects and the sound production here as well. The film does a great job of marshaling a combination of eerie silences and caustic noise in a way that feels really disorienting and true to the Stefan character's mental deterioration.
Okay.
And it's interesting how the sound becomes a really important way of exploring how just the ordinary everyday mechanisms of the place are in some ways the most dehumanizing, tormenting, element of Stefan's life. The Crealy character just becomes the most malevolent complement to what's already dehumanizing and awful about the situation that he's in.
Okay. So how would you rate this movie then?
For the performances alone, I would give it 3 stars, but I add, the great direction, the great sound production. Yeah, I've got to give this 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay.
It was a great film. It didn't feel long. It's about 103 minutes, I think. It
Okay, that's
doesn't,
pretty tight.
yeah, I mean it's average length, but it doesn't feel long at all. So it's not as if there are any problems with pacing. But when you've got Lithgow and Rush going at each other, you've got great supporting characters, you've got great direction, you've got great sound production, which I think is really important, especially in a horror film. Yeah, no, yeah, pretty much chef's kiss, right? I mean, I'm only ever going to give an out and out masterpiece 5 stars. Very few films would get 4 stars from me, and this is one of them. So highly recommend.
Okay, well, I'm definitely gonna go watch it.
All right, The Rule of Jenny Penn, highly recommend. 4 stars. Um, yeah, you know why I like it. You watch the video, hopefully. So please like and subscribe. We'll have more content coming your way.